Welcome back. I think it's common knowledge that at my rating level, and maybe yours too, lower rating levels, the mini games are decided just by one mistake or blunder, where you or your opponent hangs a major piece or opens the position in some catastrophic way that decides the game, and usually that's obvious. But I don't know if I should take this as a sign of encouragement, but my games are increasingly being decided by mistakes early in the game that neither one of us knows is a mistake until much later, and that was the case with this game, which hopefully I can show fairly quickly. Here in this position, I have just made a decent move, putting my bishop out here. This is not pin in the normal sense of the word, because the opponent can easily castle out of this, plus that knight is protected by the other knight. But it's not a bad move, and we're close to equal in this position. You can see the evaluation bar on the left. As soon as I moved this, I realized this wasn't that big of a threat. My opponent can castle, but it was a developing move. I was getting my piece out of my back rank so I could castle. And my opponent turns out to only have one good move here, and it's not castling, according to the engine. Can I show that here? There it is. And as you can see, Stockfish thinks their only good move to play right here is a3. They can castle, and it won't be a huge blunder, but it will be a mistake, according to the engine, and anything else would be a blunder. And that's fascinating to me, but here my opponent did not make that best move. They castled, which gives me -1 advantage. That's a mistake. That's not just inaccurate. And now I have several moves. Hold on a second. Hello?
Coming home now.
Okay, we'll see you in a little bit.
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye. That was my wonderful spouse. All right. Sorry about that. I usually edit those out or hit pause, but anyway, what I was saying was, here, as you can see from the engine, I only have a few moves that hold my advantage, and they're all queen moves. Queen to a5, queen to c6, queen to e6. I didn't know this at the time, but there's one thing in common with all those moves. And you might have already noticed what it is, but I didn't consider any of these moves at the time. All of those moves defend this pawn. I didn't realize it needed defending at this point. But yes, now that the king has moved, this knight can go wherever it wants. And yes, my opponent has multiple attackers on that pawn. But again, my whole idea of moving this bishop out here was to castle. So I castled. And you see the evaluation bar. That -1 advantage that I just had now goes to my opponent. I didn't know this was a blunder. I thought this was a good thing. It's part of my normal developing procedures, and at some point will possibly push this pawn forward, maybe after bringing this bishop back. At some point I hope to get this bishop off the back rank so my other rook can get involved, and we'll go about playing chess. But my opponent immediately did the only move that holds their advantage and makes me castling a mistake, and that was to take this pawn. Again, doesn't look like a huge blunder here to me. It looks like I've lost a pawn, and that's it. I assume here, because that my only good move is to take the knight. Other options are moving the queen someplace, and then when they take my knight, take back with the queen. But either way, I've lost this pawn, and that turned out to be the story of the rest of the game. But I didn't know it here. I've been down a pawn, sometimes two pawns, many times, and tactics show up later in the game. Now, when they took that pawn, I thought, well, that's not great, because sometimes a missing pawn does decide a game. But the way the rest of the game went was they took that pawn, and I took the knight, they took my knight, and we went on. But as you can see, the rest of the game, both of us played among our best moves for the rest of the game, but it was basically decided by that single pawn move, and eventually we were forced to trade. I was forced to trade queens, and that extra pawn that my opponent has, and now they have 2 extra pawns, by the way, is devastating to me. And not all of these moves are forced, but an awful lot of them were. Some of them were only moves, but now my opponent's got a +6 advantage. I can't get to those pawns. I just can't. I can check. I can try to keep my king safe. I can try to make hidey holes for my king. I can check. But eventually I resigned. I thought there's just nothing I can do. And this was one of those cases where when I resigned, I was like, oh, I hope there wasn't some tactic that I missed. But there wasn't. It went all the way back to move 10. When my opponent castled and I castled. And ever since then, none of the moves I could have played could have put me in the driver's seat. Now, my opponent did make a couple of mistakes after that point, but they weren't mistakes that gave me the advantage. They were just mistakes that lowered or lessened my opponent's advantage. So yeah, it all came back to the one move of not defending this pawn and my opponent seeing that. So that's a little frustrating, and I guess I'm going to have to, now that I'm getting into slightly higher levels of ranking, I'm going to have to start paying more attention to the fact that one pawn will often make the difference in the entire game. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.